Okay, so sorry. Um, so this last section of the class deals with sport licensing and media relations in sports. In this first video, we're going to talk about sport licensing, some definitions and things to consider. So let's get into it. Sport licensing is defined as the act of granting a second party permission to use a mark, a name, a symbol, or likeness, and essentially to make a profit off of them. Examples of licensing would be novelties, sports memorabilia, trading cards, apparels, video games, any of those types of things where a second party that isn't the sport property or a sponsor is producing a manufactured good, so to speak, and selling it for profit, or selling it at all, even if it's not for profit. So the types are a variety of different events or different activities, and sometimes they're very unique in nature. So you could say, for example, one thing that's probably one of the more unique things that I've seen licensed is funeral arrangements. So you can now see that there are caskets and urns that are licensed by different organizations, so Major League Baseball and the like. You can go out there and Google search for a casket that's licensed for the Texas Rangers or an urn, and you can find it. So we can see license could be a variety of different things, and it's not just your typical t-shirt or hat. Today we know that the sport licensing business, the global licensed product market, is $18 billion. We even see many sport organizations or leagues have their own divisions. So the NBA and Major League Baseball, the NFL, all have licensed property divisions where people work specifically to represent those brands. We even see players' unions that have divisions within those players' unions that are specifically, their job is to represent individual athlete rights. So when a video game wants to produce using the NFL logo and the player's name, that's licensed. That's a licensed product, and therefore the manufacturer of the video game has to pay both the league as well as the players' unions for, or those players for the right to do that. There's one thing that's unique, and that is the Collegiate Licensing Company. It's probably one of the bigger players in the licensing business in in the world, but especially in the United States. The Collegiate Licensing Company essentially works with a variety of different clients, and so we'll go and find one. You can see they have nearly 200 colleges and universities. They have conferences. They have bowl games. They have the NCAA as a whole. They even have the Heisman Trophy. And most of these are collegiate products. You can see in the top left of your picture here, you see a logo. That logo you'll see very common on many items that you would buy that has a collegiate logo on it. And so, for example, let's just find one. There's a lot of them listed here, you can see. Trying to get to one specifically. Stephen F. Austin. So Stephen F. Austin State University is actually a client of the Collegiate Licensing Company. In this, you can find out more information about who they are. Obviously, you all know many of y'all know what they are. But you can see facts about the information. And at the bottom, this is essentially for somebody who wants to produce an SFA licensed good. The royalty rate is 10%. So that means for everything that they sell, 10% of that goes back to the Collegiate Licensing Company and then back to the organization. Also, in many, depending on the type of product you're producing, it depends on the category, the organization that's producing that has to pay an upfront fee, so an advance fee. So if it's in category A, it's a $150 fee, then you have to pay 10% for everything you sell after that. Category B is $50, category C is $25. And without getting into details of what those categories are, the point is typically what happens is you have to pay an upfront fee in order to have the right to use those logos, and then everything that you make, you have to give, for SFA's purposes, 10% back to the Collegiate Licensing Company. Now let's go back and find a different one. Another one of their clients is a larger university in Texas, that is Texas A&M. As you can see here, their structure is a little bit different in that they have a royalty rate of 14%, yet they don't have any advance fees. So as long as you get permission to use the logo and sell, essentially everything that you sell, 14% has to go back to the CLC, and in turn the Texas A&M. You can go back through all this, look up CSC, and look at some of their clients, but essentially, you can see that's the basics of licensing. It's using, it's defined as the art of marketing names, logos, or marks, and you're using that in order to produce it. So one thing that we have to talk about is licensing something. You have to first protect it. One of those things, the way we do that, at least in the United States, is registering that mark with the U.S. government. Each of the logos that you see on the helmets that you on the screen are all licensed with the U.S. government, and therefore have protection in production. It has to be done by and in permission with the CLC. Other sport organizations, they have to develop their own licensing program, and sometimes they have to go through the steps if they don't hire a third party, which most organizations do. An example of that third party would be the Collegiate Licensing Company, or the CLC. They first basically go through this process. They conduct a trademark search, then they devise a process for finding prospective licensees. Those would be people who would produce their goods, and then they devise a process for policing the marketplace to ensure that their trademark is not being infringed upon. The CLC does pretty much all of this for organizations, and it's a hands-off approach, essentially using a third party to produce their licensing program. As I showed you a second ago, the typical structure for licensing is there's a one-time initial fee depending on the product category in which you're trying to sell. Essentially, then they pay out royalty rights for the use of the trademark, so royalty fees. Traditionally, they're 6 to 10%. However, we see the licensing royalty percentage starting to go up. I'll give you an example of Texas A&M, very popular brand having a licensing fee of 14%. SFA is up there at 10%, but as you can see, most of that is based on that 6 to 10%, and they're based on the gross sales at the wholesale cost rate. Now, many licensees, meaning those that produce the goods, will typically do it for several reasons. One, they try to enter a new market to get in front of fans. Second is they're trying to boost sales in certain product category, or they're trying to improve their image. So we look at it, revenues for licensing are a big part of many sport organizations. If you remember back, there are 4 major sport revenues for organizations. Those would be broadcasting rights fees, sponsorship. Those are the 2 big ones, especially for large organizations like the IOC. However, a lot of colleges rely on their licensing program, which is one of the 4, as well as ticketing. That's the 4th one. So how do we know what impacts the demand for licensed product? Well, there's lots of things. Winning is the big one. However, we can never really rely on winning. We know that winning championships, having winning seasons, are both things that can influence and increase the purchase of licensed products. Oftentimes people try to buy products and affiliate themselves with other fans or affiliate themselves with the organization, even if they've never even been to a game. So the 3 major growth areas for licensed products in sports are kids apparel or kids wear. Second one is international, and the third one is new markets. And so new markets being such as CrossFit. Some people argue NASCAR, and while it's relatively getting older now, we still see an increasing market for that, as well as Do Action Sports Tour, any of those types of activities that we'd say with new leagues or activities. Mixed martial arts is another one. But we see these are the 3 main growth areas for licensed products: kids wear, international, and new leagues. So what are some of the main benefits to sport properties by actually encouraging or actually getting involved in a licensed program? First one is promotional exposure. Second one is profit from the license application, so those upfront fees, and as well as the ongoing royalty fees, as well as the protection they get because it is licensed. They have legal right to deny someone from using their products. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. So what are the advantages of being a licensed product? Well, obviously the advantage is generating customer awareness and interest with really little or no investment on your part. All you're saying is, here are logos that you can use. Essentially, what the CLC does is it sends, anybody who wants to produce something, sends it to the organization before it is allowed to be produced. The organization either approves or requests revisions, but that's pretty much the only investment you have to put into it. And so generate customer awareness. People are walking around with your shirts on, your hats on that has your logo. You're also shifting a significant amount of risk away from you, the licensor, to a second-party manufacturer, the licensee. These risks will be production and overhead costs. So what happens when you produce too many t-shirts? Well, you as the organization, the licensor, really it's not your fault, and you don't have to deal with it. You also don't have to promote your products to different retailers. You don't have to distribute those products to the retailers. If you have excess inventory and have that surplus, or you don't have to deal with unpredictable demand, all of those things are off your hands. So the advantage is pretty great in that you're shifting all of that risk that could come from producing too much or not enough to a third-party retailer that does it for a living. Also, you have the opportunity to generate a significant marketplace presence before the team even plays a single game. You can start to spread out your logo and the license good before the season's even started, unlike other forms of revenue, that is broadcasting and ticketing. Other advantage, obviously, it's additional revenue that you now get. It's, again, low cost or free publicity, people walking around with your shirts or your licensed apparel. It also may enhance your image, especially if you get a licensee that produces products that are of high quality or of high demand. So, for example, producing Arctic, I forgot the name of it. These cups, I forgot what they're basically called. Not Arctic, but sorry about that. Basically, cups. The Yeti. There we go. Finally, the Yeti. Cups could be an example of enhancing an image, putting a logo on it. It also gives you trademark protection. So again, registering with the U.S. government gives you the right to control that mark. And you might be able to co-branding, so using 2 brands or more brands to produce under one product. Now, there are disadvantages. Obviously, the first one is that while it is additional revenue, it's not as much as you could make. So royalty fees, again, are typically 6 to 10%, could be more. That's a lot of revenue that you could be making off of that remaining 90 to 94%. You also have a lack of manufacturer control. While you do approve the logos and you approve anything that's being produced, you're not there watching it being manufactured or ensuring that it's of a high quality. Because many times somebody buys a t-shirt, it tears apart, or a hat, or a golf bag, or whatever it may be. If it has your logo on it, then it means it's yours. And so many times you lose that control. You also may be producing products that are unrelated to you and your organization. So another example would be if you are a Christian university and you don't want to have, or a religious university in general, so I guess Christian's a bad example, but religious university and you don't want to have drinking as a part of your culture, yet somebody wants to produce a shot glass or beer mugs that have your logo on it. If you aren't controlling the market, that you could lose some of that. Those issues. You also have to deal with poor timing, so maybe coming out with products that have been recalled that have your logo on it, or that comes back to the inappropriate distribution, sending it to the wrong markets. So how do we go about promoting through licensing, or the promotion through licensing? Well, there's ways that we pursue these promotional objectives through licensing. So for example, we're trying to create brand awareness and appeal. We're trying to basically transfer the source credibility from the licensor to licensee. And the licensor, meaning the sport organization, needs a licensee to produce high-quality products. Another one is penetrating existing customer markets. Here we're finding a broad array of licensed goods that meet the needs and wants of consumers in an existing market. We also see fantasy sports one way that our market is moving forward. It's a $1 billion a year business. Many people argue it's even greater than that. And we know that motivations are a big part of why consumers are part of fantasy football. Motivations to be a part of that brand, that is. Another one's pursuing new markets. So as we said before, the 3 major markets are youth sports or kids apparel, international, and new markets or new leagues. Youth sports is an example. We know that more kids try to associate themselves with brands that are very popular. We also see pursuing new markets. We see joint use agreements where there's 2 or more rights holders in a market that appear together. Example is, for example, a house divided mat or a flag that you see outside of a house. They maybe have a grad that's from UT and a grad that's from Baylor, and so you see that there is a house divided flag. That's an example of joint use agreements. Exploring new licensed product categories, so unique licensing goods. So I gave you the example of caskets and urns, or new licensed products in consumer markets. So when I worked for the Express, we had plastic cups that were of high quality that were sold in local gas stations called the Wagabag stores. Those are one of our sponsors. You can buy these collector cups at any of these stores. So producing new licensed products in these areas. Other ways that we want to look at, and we'll cover some of these in the next few steps, is how do we go about having a successful license program. The first one is recruiting and selecting licensing. The most popular method for recruiting and selecting licensees is through trade shows. So again, the most popular method is trade shows and networking with licensing programs. Another one that we have to question is how do we build a relationship and work together to follow basically 3 steps in producing these new offerings and logo application. First one is we have to go through a market analysis. Then we have to go through a technical analysis. So first about what does our market look like? Technical analysis, what is it we're actually producing? Is it going to be high quality? And then the third one is financial analysis. So are we going to be able to make a profit off of it? The third one is preparing for peak demand. And so preparing for possible winners. So championship t-shirts are oftentimes produced for both teams so that you can get that t-shirt off to those that want it very quickly. The problem is now you have a lot of different t-shirts that need to be donated or thrown away because they're no longer existing. Fourth one is they develop a retailer promotional program, and this is basically the key to retail success is having a strong relationship between the retailer and educating the customer about where their products are actually, where they can actually buy the products. The last couple of dealing with licensing programs to ensure they're successful is communicating with the customer. This is through your advertising and your sponsorships, through the publicity. You have to make the things that you're doing newsworthy. You have to drive traffic to retail shops. You also sometimes use your players to help do this. So having signings at retail shops where they can buy licensed apparel. And then the sixth one is creating policies and procedures that relate to the royalties. So in other words, in this, the typical fee is 6 to 10%. But we also have other types of, at times, royalty-related policies or procedures in place. So for example, an advanced royalty fee. An advanced royalty fee is an upfront cost or money for the licensee. So this is, we've talked about SFA categories anywhere from $25 to $150 up front. Another one is royalty guarantees. So this is a minimum payout in royalties regardless of how much the licensee sells. So they may say, you can produce this, but I need to be guaranteed at least $1,000 in revenue from your royalties. And then obviously sell more than that, then you will be able to pay us more. Royalty reports, these are typically 4 times a year that show sales in the different quarters. Royalty computation audits, these are essentially making sure that the reports that are being provided, those royalty reports, are in true accurate. Sometimes third parties come and do that. And then the last one is royalty exemptions, and these are essentially giving exemptions so that you don't have to pay licensing fee back to the organization. And typically these are used for internal use. So maybe you buy championship t-shirts for all of your staff at your organization or your team. You want to give them all bags that are produced by one of your licensees. Essentially the licensee does not have to pay royalties on that. And so sales that don't have a fee attached to it.